Welcome to Chess Dog. Today we have a special treat. It has happened. Tani Adewumi has beaten Hikaru Nakamura. Now, a couple of qualifiers. Yeah, it was a blitz game, 3-minute blitz game on chess.com, and it actually happened last year. But take this into consideration. At the time this game was played, Hikaru Nakamura outrated Tani online by over 1,000 rating points. Tani was rated, I think, 2130 something at the time this game was played. He has since hit a peak of 2,500 in online blitz. Also, Hikaru is historically, without question, the greatest online blitz chess player in history. And until very recently, Carlsen has maybe come and surpassed that a little bit. But for years, he's dominated online blitz, and he still does. So let's take a look at this game. Tani has the white pieces, Hikaru black, and he begins with d4, knight f6, bishop f4, the very flexible London system. Hikaru plays a mainline defense, very traditional defense, e6, e3, c5, c3, d5. Tani plays h3. He wants to be able to tuck that bishop back to h2 if it's attacked by the knight. Hikaru says, okay, well, I'll just trade it off with my own bishop instead by playing bishop to d6. Bishop d6, queen d6. Now, Hikaru has gotten that bishop off the board, but he had to trade off his good bishop to do it. His remaining bishop, the bishop at c8, is blocked in by his own pawn. So there's a little bit of a positional concession by Hikaru there. Knight f3, knight b to d7, knight b d2, e5. So Hikaru is opening up the center. Even though he's underdeveloped, his king is still in the middle of the board, but he says white's king is in the middle of the board too, so it's okay. Pawn takes, knight takes e5. Now knight to b3, putting pressure on c5, and that ends up being very significant in this 3-minute blitz game. Hikaru here should have played knight f3, and after queen f3, it's an equal and competitive game. But instead, he made a mistake. He castled. And now Tani immediately plays knight takes knight, queen takes knight, knight takes c5. So he's won a pawn, and he has a much better structure. That pawn on d5 is incredibly weak, in addition to being a pawn up. Hikaru plays on. If he had been playing Carlsen, he probably would have resigned here. But he's up 1,000 rating points. So rook e8, putting pressure down the e file opposite the king. Knight d3. Tani reroutes the knight with tempo by attacking the queen. Queen goes to g5. The queen hits the g2 pawn so that white can't develop that bishop at f1. White plays queen to f3. Now that g2 pawn is protected, and he can develop his bishop. Bishop to f5, and this ends up being another mistake from Hikaru. What he should have done is actually play d4. White would be forced to play cd4. He can't take with the e-pawn because of the pin down the e-file. And then queen to a5 check. And white doesn't want to move the king, and the only other option he has is to play b4, blocking that check. The b4 pawn is defended by the knight. Queen a3, threatening queen to c3 check. Double attack on the king and the rook, so the rook would have to move to c1. And here, white's still a bit better because he has those nice central pawns on d4 and e3, but it's much more competitive. It's a real game. But instead, he played bishop to f5, and the problem with this is it allows white to trade off the queens with queen to f4. White would love to get queens off the board. He's up a pawn. He has a better structure. The endgame would be great for him. Hikaru doesn't want to trade off queens and let that knight settle on f4. And you might be asking, why doesn't Hikaru just move the queen away? Queen g6. Well, because of this move, knight to e5. And after queen h5, white can play bishop to e2, and the queen really has nowhere to go. White could also play g4 here with a fork if he chose to do so. So after queen to f4, what Hikaru decides to do is play h6. That way, Tani's the one that has to exchange the queens, and after the pawn takes, the f4 square would not be available for the knight. But Tani should have taken the queens. Instead, he plays h4. And after queen g6, knight e5, now the queen has this little cubby hole on h7. So Hikaru was able to keep queens on the board, which is something he wants because he wants to have some tricks. He's down material, his structure is inferior, so he needs tricks, and keeping the queens on the board helps him do that. Tani still plays very aggressively. He comes right out with it. G4, wants to open up that G file. And the computer says that Hikaru should have played bishop to b1, but who's going to play that? You know, he comes up with this idea. Knight takes g4, and after knight g4, Hikaru plays rook to e4. The idea being, of course, that now he can just take that knight and be in pretty good shape. But Tani plays the exact right move here. The perfect move. He plays knight to h6 check. The queen can't retake the knight because then Tani would just take the bishop. The bishop would be left undefended. So he has to take it with the pawn. And now he's got an open g file to work with. In addition to the material advantage, he's got pressure against Hikaru's king. Rook to g1 check, king h8, queen to d6. Now that queen is putting pressure on d5. He's threatening to just take d5. And I don't see a way black can defend it. If he plays the move that seems most obvious, which is bishop to e6, then f3, what a strong move. Black cannot let white's queen get to e5 because if he delivers check, it's over. The king can't go anywhere. The combination of the rook at g1 and the queen at e5 would be devastating. For example, if in this position black played rook takes h4, then queen to e5 check. That's it. The game is over. So after rook e3, white would play king f2, and the rook would have nowhere to go and would be lost, and black would be completely lost. So he can't defend that pawn with the bishop. So he plays rook to e6, the best move he can come up with. Queen takes d5. That's 2 pawns and a safer king. Hikaru plays f6, wants to block that diagonal to keep his king safe. Tani castles long, moves the king out of the center, and now he has control over the d file. Rook e to e8, queen to d6. Again, threatening queen takes f6, which would be curtains. Hikaru defends the f6 pawn, bishop to c4 to control that key g8 square. Bishop b1 with the not so subtle threat of queen to c2 checkmate, but Tani plays this move, bishop to d3, interfering with the queen and the bishop, and now more pieces come off. Bishop d3, rook d3. He doesn't take with the queen because now Tani's saying, I don't want to trade queens either. I've got a nice attack. I'm the one applying the pressure here. Queen to f7, queen to f4, threatening the pawn at h6. Hikaru should just admit this is his mistake and go back to h7, but instead he presses on with h5. White plays rook to d6. The threat is queen to h6 check, and then rook takes f6. After rook a e8, that allows white to execute their threat. Queen to h6 check, queen h7, rook takes f6. And now that's another pawn. The game obviously is over. Much safer king, decisive material advantage. Hikaru plays rook to g8. He plays rook to g5, Tani. Rook takes g5, queen takes g5, and now he's threatening rook to h6, which would pin the queen to the king, and that material would be lost. So he counterattacks with rook to g8, and Tani has a very strong move here. Queen to e5, setting up a discovered check. The most powerful move in the game, the discovered check. And he set that up with the queen. The rook moves, black would be in check. So Hikaru deals with that by playing rook to g1 check, king d2, now queen to g7, blocking that line of attack. But it's too late. And here comes the final maneuver from Tani. Queen to h5 check, king to g8. If the queen moved over, he just played the rook over, pinning it. Queen to e8 check, king to h7, and rook to f7. The queen is lost. A brilliant game from an amazing young talent. If you enjoyed this, you can show a thank you by clicking the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. Goodbye.